Hi guys, it's Renee and welcome back to my channel, and today we are continuing the read-alongs for Scum Villian Self-Saving System. We are starting with volume 2 and I am quite excited because I feel like this is the first genuine turning point that we have in the overall novel. So I want to see how it goes. I kind of remember bits and pieces, but it's kind of a guessing game as to what all I remember. So we'll just have to see. I'm actually on time for one, so I'm gonna give it like a few minutes just to, have people jump in if they want to jump in. I am aware that unfortunately this is not my usual time. I usually stream on Saturdays and Sundays, so like middle of the week is very strange, and then also I don't tend to stream this late at night for myself. Um, but yeah, we're just gonna take it as it comes. Unfortunately, I couldn't make Sundays live, and I didn't want to miss a live again, so I just decided to postpone it to today because that was the first day of this week that I could manage. I hope the audio is okay. I did have some technical difficulties. I checked it before I started, but I'm hoping that it won't, just suddenly show up again. So yeah, we shall see. I couldn't find my normal bookmark. I think it might be at my desk. But anyway, so we're having this bookmark for today, and I'm excited to be back so soon with volume 2. We are simultaneously doing Modu silent reading from Priest as well, which I am really excited about because I just I need more of the series, and since we're not going to get more of the series, then we might as well enjoy the novel, which we actually do have. So anyway, okay, with all of that said, oh, I still have my slip in here. Oh goodness. Um, okay, so yeah, I just quickly wanna open this up. Can all books not just be this quality? It's so freaking beautiful. So this is the cover and back cover of the book we have on the inside of the cover as always. Oh, and that's gorgeous and so sad at the same time. I don't like the implications, but look at this art. Isn't it absolutely stunning? Okay. Also, I ordered my Heaven Official's Blessing volume seven. Oh goodness. Today, and I'm so excited. Anyway, okay. So I think I have spoken enough. Again, I hope the audio is okay. If anyone could maybe confirm in the chat, that would be great. But otherwise, I think we're more or less just gonna jump straight into it. I just hope that I don't fail you guys. Oh, and then also just a quick note before we do, I will be taking a 10-minute breather on the hour. So yeah, just a note. Hi. So yeah, okay. Other than that, I think we can get started. So we left off. Where did we leave off? Oh goodness, I should have had book 1 here with me just to kind of like refresh where we left off, because for some reason my brain just halted on the fact of um the um Lobing her being thrown off the abyss, and obviously that's not where we ended. We had the entire encounter with airplane flying towards the sky, or whatever his very long name is. um okay, just want to see something. This is interesting. Okay, so unlike with Urha, it seems these just pick up from the previously left off chapter. They don't rename the chapters. Okay, chapter 6, Jin Lan. 3 years went by in the blink of an eye. During these 3 years, other than occasionally asking Lord Qingge for assistance in clearing his meridians to treat his poison, requesting medicinal prescriptions from Wu Qingfang, and briefly visiting Jingjing Peak to arrange leveling missions for his disciples, Shen Qingqie spent most of his time wandering about the outside world. He passed the days leisurely until an urgent notice from Yu Qingyan arrived to suddenly summon him back to Tongchong Mountain. As the Qingjing Peak disciples had seen nary a shadow of their peak lord in such a long while, for his return they gathered at mountain gates to they gathered at the mountain gates well ahead of time to welcome him. As soon as they saw Shen Qinqie steadily climbing the mountain steps, they all flocked towards him, clothes rustling. Oh goodness, sorry. The one leading them, Ming Fan, had by now become a lanky young man. Though you couldn't say he was extraordinarily handsome, his features could still be considered neat. Anyhow, the sharp mouth and sunken cheeks he had in his youth were no more, and gone was the petty cannon fodder's face that had been so obvious at a single glance. Okay, so he's now become more than just petty cannon fodder, it seems. Even more striking was Ning Ying Ying, who had become a lovely young lady with a splendid figure. Upon seeing Shen Qingqie, she rushed over and grabbed his arm, pulling him up the heaven-ascending stairs. While being greeted by a sweet-smelling maiden was indeed a wonderful thing, Shen Qingqie unfortunately couldn't enjoy it, especially because Ning Ying Ying had developed quite nicely. No longer was she that dainty and delicate little girl from the past. Sometimes her chest would accidentally brush against him. Oh, this is awkward. In fact, it did so until Shen Jingque, face still expressionless, was steaming with cold sweat. He had once again thought of those two long chains of posts in Proud Immortal Demon's Ways comment section, the ones demanding Shen Jingque's castration. Shizun, you're always away from the mountain, Ning Ying Ying said, cutely vying for his attention. Your disciples all miss you so much. This master has also missed you all, Shen Jingque said affectionately. That's not right, he was thinking. Shouldn't the one you miss be Lo Binghe? Why are you thinking about a scum villain? And as one of Lo Binghe's wives, weren't you originally supposed to suffer 5 continuous years of sleepless nights and lack of appetite, becoming all emaciated and stricken with grief? Oh goodness, that sounds like fun. Ugh. Why does it look like you've become a plumper instead? The disciples escorting Shen Qingqie to Chongding Peak. The disciples escorted Shen Qingqie to Chongding Peak. In Chongding Peak's main hall, 11 peak lords had already all sat down. 1 or 2 trusted disciples stood behind each peak lord, with the exception of Lu Jingge. Traditionally, Baijiang Peak's modus operandi was a hands-off, shepherd style of education. Everyone trained on their own. The peak lord would occasionally pop up to beat up a bunch of disciples, but other than that, they gradually... Wow, okay, I'm struggling tonight. They generally wouldn't teach anything else. This continued until a disciple could fight off their master, at which point the master handed over the title of peak lord. Thus, Lord Qingge naturally didn't have any trusted disciples. Shen Qingqie greeted everyone in turn, then sat in the second seat, which was for Qingjing Peak, while Ming Fan and Ning Ying Ying stood behind him. Across from him were Xianshu Peak's Qi Jingqi and Liu Mingyan. Yu Qingyan had yet to announce the start of the meeting, so Shen Qingqie opened and shut the folding fan in his hand, playing with it while he looked around at all the peak lords and their disciples. He found himself thinking that if Luo Binghe were still here, no one else would be standing behind him. Neither would there be any questions as to who was the most outstanding disciple of Tangchong Mountain Sect's next generation. His thoughts were still running wild when Ye Qingyan spoke. Does anyone know of Jinlan City? I've heard little about it, said Shang Qionghuan. It's located in the Central Plains, where the two great rivals, Luo and Heng, meet. The city values trade. It's said to be quite prosperous. Yeah, and I don't think he knows it yet, which is kind of hilarious and sad at the same time. Ye Qingyan nodded. Correct. Jinlan city is accessible from all sides by both land and water, so merchants from all over have always gathered there. But 2 months ago, Jinlan city shut its gates. Not only are the gates impassable, not even letters can be relayed. A healthy, thriving trade city shutting its gates with no warning was like a financial center abruptly breaking off all relations with other branches. It was illogical. There absolutely had to be more to it. Ooh. I don't know if I should hope for Lobing her to already make an appearance again. Shen Qingque lifted the teacup by his hand and scraped at the tea leaves on the surface. Zhaohua Monastery is nearest to Jinlan City, and my impression was that they share a very close relationship. If something did happen, the masters of the temple would have realized something was wrong. Correct, Ye Qingyan said. 20 days ago, a merchant from Jinlan City escaped the city via waterways and rushed to Zhaohua Monastery to cry for help. If he was using the word escaped, it seemed that the situation was genuinely serious. The entire hall grew solemn. That middle-aged man was the owner of Jinlan City's first weapons shop. Over the years, he had often gone to Zhaohua Monastery to pray and burn incense, so quite a few of the temple's monks knew him. When he arrived, he was swathed entirely in black cloth, with only half of his face exposed. He was already fully exhausted by the time he reached Zhaohua Monastery, and he collapsed on the mountain steps as he told them repeatedly that there was a terrifying plague within the city. Oh goodness, okay. The monks guarding the mountain immediately carried the man into the main hall and reported the events to the head abbot, but by the time the head abbot rushed out with several other masters, it was too late. He died? Asked Lu Qingge. The merchant had been by then decayed into a skeletal state. Oh my word, that is grim. Oh, oh. Okay. Hadn't Ye Qingyan just said that the man had exhausted himself by the time he reached monastery gates? How could he have become a skeleton in the blink of an eye? Shen Qingque muttered. Xishong said that the merchant was swathed in black cloth from head to toe. Precisely. During the wait, the monk tried to help him remove the black cloth. However, whenever they touched him, he wailed in terrible pain, like his skin and flesh were being ripped off, so that they didn't dare remove it by force. That's very grim. The masters of Zhaohua Monastery were deeply disturbed, and after discussion they sent Master Wu Chen and several Buddhist elders to investigate that very night. As of today, they have yet to return. Compared to Shen Qingque and his cohorts, the masters of Wu generation were were uniformly higher in seniority, and their cultivation wouldn't be lacking either. Hence, Shen Qingque was a bit flabbergasted. Not a single one came back? Ye Qingyan solemnly nodded. Huanhua Palace and Tianyi Temple have also sent 10 odd disciples each. They met with the same result. No one returned. 3 of the 4 major sects had been dragged into this mess, so naturally Changchung Mountain couldn't just passively observe. No wonder Ye Qingyan had sent an emergency summons. Indeed, Ye Qingyan said, with no other choice, our fellow cultivators from the other sects sent Changchung Mountain an urgent letter with an emissary pleading for our assistance. We will certainly lend it. However, this is a serious situation. I'm afraid there may be petty ne'er-do-wells of other races fanning the flames to stoke this incident, stirring up havoc. Some of us will go, but some must stay behind to guard the peaks. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, no, she has a penchant for the creepy plagues, honestly. In other words, to prevent a situation like the incident with Xiang when they had been completely vulnerable. Needless to say, other races could only refer to the demon race. I kind of wondered about that. I don't know why my brain didn't make the connection. Liu Qingge was the first to say, Baijiang Peak is willing to escort Mu Shidi to the city. Since there was a plague, Changcheng Mountain's Mu Qingfang definitely had to go. Shen Jingxue looked at these two, one who was responsible for making his medicine, the other responsible for clearing his meridians. Both were leaving, and Shen Jingxue didn't have a protagonist's halo with which to protect himself. What if there was an unexpected accident? This was really too concerning. How can he not do his part to watch over them? So he hurriedly added, Qingxue is willing to go as well. My original plan was for you to watch the mountain, said Qingyuan. Of course Shen Jingxue knew how to deal with him. All he needed to do was endlessly pester Ye Qingyan. There's no need for Shen Meng Xishong to think me so fragile. Even if Qingxue is untalented, he knows a few things about demons. If they really are the ones making mischief, I can still be of some assistance. I always find it a little bit strange when there's reference to the person that's talking, um, referring to themselves in third person, but I know it's a thing that sometimes happens in Mandarin. The Walking Demon Encyclopedia, both the original and current flavor, could definitively live up to the title. After all, there was that stack of records and ancient books in the back of Qingjing Peak's bamboo house, the same ones that hundreds of generations of peak lords had to read in full before they were allowed to succeed the position. Liu Qingyan thought for a while. If we let Shen Jingxue go with Liu Qingge and Mu Qingfang, it would be far easier for Shen Jingxue to suppress the without a cure poison still within his body. Also, if they got into a fight, the Baijiang Peak Lord could protect him. Therefore, in the end, everyone was divided into three groups. The Luoxian Mu trio would clear the way as the vanguard. They would go to Jinglan City first to investigate. The second group would wait outside and act in accordance with their report. The third group would stay and keep watch on Changcheng Mountain. The situation was urgent, so there was no time for leisurely taking a carriage or boat. Though Shen Jingxue disliked flying on his sword, he knew that at a time like this, he needed to keep up with everyone else's momentum. Thus, the trio flew out on their blades. Before half a day had passed, Shen Jingxue gazed downward from above the clouds, took a deep breath, and yelled to his two sect siblings. The Luo and Heng River junction is right below us. When they looked down from the great height, they indeed saw two rivers meeting each other like a winding pair of endless thin silver ribbons. Oh, that's a beautiful image. The water sparkled under the... Hold on. Sorry, a mosquito. Damn, now I've lost my place. The water sparkled under the sunlight, akin to a haphazard dance of silver scales. One of the two rivers was the one Luo Binghe had been placed into after he was born, left to drift downstream. The Luo, from which his surname derived. The trio chose to descend at a wide and level hilltop. From there they could faintly see the curling eaves of far-off Jinlan City, its tightly closed gates, and the raised drawbridge. Shen Jingxue lowered the hand with which he'd shaded his eyes. Why didn't we fly straight into the city? Good question. I was just wondering the same thing. In the past, at Jinlan City's governor's request, Zhaohua Monastery cast an enormous barrier covering their airspace, Mo Qingfan explained. It prevents immortal swords or anything with spiritual or demonic chi from passing through. They'd be forced to veer off course. Chen Qingxue had personally witnessed Zhao Monastery's barrier casting abilities with a group of barrier masters employed by the VIPs at the Immortal Alliance conference. If they ever ranked second, no one would dare claim first, so Chen Qingxue didn't ask further questions. Since they couldn't descend by air and couldn't enter through the gates, there had to be some other means of ingress. As it turned out, Yu Qingyan had briefed Mu Qingfang about the situation in detail, and he guided the other two through a forest. From within the shade of the trees there came the murmur of flowing water. That sound emerged from a low cave. Mu Qingfang waved the others over. There's an underground river here. It leads into the city. Chen Qingxue understood. That weapon merchant escaped through here? Wu Qingfang nodded. Several merchants who participated in black market dealings used this to meet or smuggle goods through it. Not many people know this route, but because the weapons merchant had a good relationship with several of Zhao Monastery's masters, he once disclosed a few things to them. The cave entrance was covered in vines and stood only as tall as their chests. They had to stoop to enter. After walking for a while, they finally felt the ceiling rise, and the sound of flowing water began to gurgle. Several battered, worn-out boats were anchored by the riverbed. Chen Qingxue chose a slightly better boat that at least didn't leak, then flicked his fingers. The lamp hanging at the bow flared with light. After looking left and right, he found only one oar. Oh goodness, why is there so much tension when there's not yet anything that should be causing tension? Okay, we're on page 70. I feel like we're doing decently well. Just wanted to take a quick sip of water. Though to be fair, I'm just realizing that it's not like we started on page 1. We've only read 6 pages. Chen Qingxue made a gesture of request towards Liu Qingge. We'll be going against the current, so rowing into the city will require the person among us with the best arm strength. Shidi, if you please. With a dark expression, Liu Qingge took that long, thin boat oar and diligently began to use it as a punting pole. With each stroke, the boat leapt forward at an incredible distance. The lamp at the bow creaked and swayed jerkily. Chen Qingxue pulled Mu Qingfang over to sit down and glanced at the glittering water by the boat. He could even see several fish happily swishing their tails as they swam by. The water is so clear, he said idly. Right after he said this, something much larger drifted along after the swimming fish. I'm assuming it's a corpse, and I haven't checked to confirm, and I'm kind of scared to. Why am I scared to? It's a book. It's a book. It can't hurt me. Face down in the water was a corpse. Oh great. Chen Qingxue shot upward in his seat. Frick, a floating corpse. I just said the water is so clear, and you reward me by drifting over a floating corpse? Do you have to be so heavy-handed when you slap my face? Indeed, the book does. Very much so. Liu Qingge used the oar to hook the floating corpse and flip it over. It was actually another skeleton. They hadn't noticed earlier because its entire body, including its head, was swathed in black cloth. Also, as noted, it had been floating face down. Mushidi, do you know if this world has a kind of plague that can make a person instantaneously decay into a skeleton? Shen Qingque asked. Mu Jingfan shook his head. It's unheard of. Since they were moving against the current, they would be pushed backward unless they kept advancing. Having stayed still for so long, their little boat had already moved a distance back. Oh, goodness. Liu Xingge picked up the oar again, and after a moment he spoke. There's more ahead. Oh, this is so grim. I need to go to sleep in like a few hours. This is not gonna go well. Sure enough, 5 or 6 more floating corpses drifted towards them from up ahead, one after another. All were skeletons, swathed in black cloth, just like the first. While Shen Qingque fell deep into thought, Liu Qingge abruptly stabbed the long oar into the nearby stone wall. The thin and brittle bamboo actually stuck straight into the solid, seamless stone. This stabilized the boat, fixing it in place. Shen Qingque had also sensed something was wrong, and he sprang to his feet. Who is it? A sound of hurried breathing came from the dark depths before them. The lantern at the prow of the boat faintly illuminated a human silhouette. Then they heard a youth's voice say, Who are you? What are you doing? Sneaking around in this underground river? You're here too. I'd ask you the same, said Shen Qingque. Though he stood on a broken-down little boat, between his teal robes, black hair, and the long sword hanging at his waist, not to mention his every movement so calm and composed, he still possessed quite the immortal's demeanour. Shen Qingque had by now become an experienced poser, and had managed to put his own spin on the badass act. The way he says it, though. Unexpected, the youth hadn't anticipated someone so high and mighty. He balked for a long moment before shouting, You should leave. No one is allowed into the city. Liu Qingge humphed. You? Who could you keep away? There is a plague in Jinlan. If you don't want to die, then get out. Young man, we are here precisely for that reason, Mu Qingfan said gently. When they refused to leave, the youth yelled angrily, Do you not understand human speech? Hurry and get out, or else I won't be so polite. Before he finished speaking, he was attacking them with a spear, ferocious like a tiger, and heartily intimidating. Liu Qingge let out a disdainful laugh, and he pulled the bamboo oar out of the wall. With a flick of the pole, the youth was sent flying into the river. Yet the boy continued to spit and curse even while splattering out the water. Should we fish him out? Asked Shen Qingque. What for? He's young and full of energy. Let's go. Liu Qingge continued to push them forward. The trio exited the underground river, and the illicit boat drifted back into the darkness along with the current. The exit was at the city's most overgrown pond, and not a single person was around. After they walked towards the center of the city for a while, out of nowhere, a set of footsteps caught up to them from behind. The bedraggled youth charged forward and yelled at them, flustered and annoyed. I told you not to enter the city. What use is it to have you here? So many people have already come, saying they were going to save us from the plague. Head monks and big-shot Taoist Palace, whoever. In the end, none of them were able to leave. You're looking for death. So this young man had ambushed them in the dark, with their best interest in mind. Then since we have already entered, what do you think we should do? Shen Qingque asked. What else can you do? The youth replied. Follow me and don't run around. I'll take you to the old monk. Oh my goodness, he sounds like he's talking to a bunch of kids, which is hilarious. Oops, sorry, just give me a second. Oh yay, we get some art. Okay, look at this, it's beautiful. The trio had no objections. None of them were familiar with Jinlan City, so of course it was best to have a guide to stop them from an accidental detour. Chen Qingque looked down and asked, "Young man, what is your name?" The youth puffed up his chest. "My name is Yang Yixian. I'm the son of the owner of Jinji Weapons Shop." Was it possible that he was referring to the weapons merchant who had risked death to bring the word to Zhaohua Monastery in search of aid? As Chen Qingque appraised the youth, Liu Qingge asked, "What are you looking at?" "The way I see it, this child can exchange a few blows with you and has a pretty good temperament," he replied. "Both traits are hard to find. He's a promising talent." "What does that matter? I don't take disciples. Too bothersome." As they walked into the main part of the city, more and more pedestrians began to appear, but this more was only in comparison to the previously empty streets. At most there were only 3 or 4 silhouettes per street, and all were buried in black cloth from head to toe, their movements hasty, like birds startled by a bow, or fish slipping through a net. The Jinji Weapons Shop was appreciably large. It sat on the widest main road and occupied 4 storefronts in a row, all connected together into one store. It even had an inner courtyard, inner hall, and a cellar. Oh goodness, okay. Master Wu Chen was in the cellar. He lay on the bed, a blanket covering his lower body, and as soon as he saw Tangchung Mountain sect's reinforcements, he began to chant Amitabha. I never know how to pronounce that, I'm so sorry. "Master, the circumstances are urgent. Let's skip the pleasantries," said Shen Jingque. "What is the plague raging through Junlan City? Why did you enter but never leave, without even sending a message? And why is everyone wrapped in black cloth?" Wu Chen forced a smile. The answer to all of Master Shen's questions is in fact one and the same. As he said this, he lifted the blanket covering his lower body. Chen Jingque stiffened. Underneath the blankets there lay only a pair of thighs from the knees down. Everything had disappeared. Where there should have been a pair of calves, there was nothing. Oh, that is so grim. Okay. "Who did this?" Liu Qingge asked sternly. Wu Chen shook his head. "Not who." Chen Qingque was puzzled. If not who, then did they disappear on their own? Unexpectedly, Wu Chen nodded. This pair of legs did indeed disappear on their own. His legs were still swathed in black cloth from the knees up. Wu Chen reached out, straining to unwrap them, and Mu Qingfan hurried to help. "This may make everyone a bit uncomfortable," Wu Chen warned. Black cloth was unwrapped layer by layer. When Shen Qingque saw what lay inside, his breath stopped. Okay, I'm kind of weary about reading the description, but here we go. "Great Master, you call this a bit uncomfortable?" He's thinking that, he's not saying. The place that should have been Wu Chen's thighs had thoroughly festered, the skin necrotized into a mass of rotten flesh. That's wonderful, we love it. After the black cloth was untied, a terrible stench came from them in waves. "This is Jinlan City's plague?" Shen Jingque asked. "Yes," said Wu Chen. "When this disease first develops, red patches appear in a small area. After 3 or 5 days, on the short end, half a month on the long, the red patches expand and fester. After another month, the rot advances down to the bones. In order to delay the progression, one must swathe oneself in a black cloth and avoid exposure to light and the elements. No wonder everyone in the city had bundled themselves up until they were black mummies. If the disease develops over a month's time, why did Yang Xiang, the fellow who went to notify Zhaohua Monastery, instantly decay into a skeleton? Chen Jingque asked. A sorrowful expression appeared on Wu Cheng's face. This old monk is ashamed to say that he only later discovered that in the effect. Sorry, why am I struggling so much? Give me a second. This old monk is ashamed to say that he only later discovered that the infected patients can survive for approximately a month as long as they stay within Jinlan city. But if after they are infected they go a certain distance away from the city, the disease's progression accelerates. My two shadis discovered this the moment after they rashly tried to leave the city and return to the monastery. No wonder no one could enter and no one could leave. What is the origin of the disease? Liu Qingge asked. How is it transmitted? Wu Chen could only sigh. This one is ashamed. We have passed a great deal of time in the city, yet still we have not made any progress towards a solution. We do not know the illness's origin, nor its method of transmission. We do not know if it can be transmitted. Mu Qingfang was shocked. What do you mean? Chen Jingque realized something. Observe the weapon seller's son. He has been taking close care of Master Wu Chen for a long time, yet he wears not a strip of black cloth. His skin is still intact, and he is quite healthy. If this is truly a plague, wouldn't it be strange that Master Wu Chen had not infected him? That is indeed true. Precisely, said Wu Chen. This one is terribly sorry to have let you all be trapped here. You only intended to save people from disaster. There is no need for apologies, said Chen Qingque. He noted that Mu Qingfang was absorbed in investigating the festering parts of Wu Chen's leg, like he couldn't smell a hint of the stench. Mushidi, have you made any discoveries? Can you create a medicine to treat it? Mu Qingfang shook his head. This doesn't seem like a plague, but rather like... He looked at the few people around him. This humble one needs to examine more patients before he can come to a definite conclusion. But he has an idea, and I'm curious about what that idea is. I might think a curse, but why does it afflict certain people and not others? Chen Jingque exited the cellar, whereupon he saw the weapon seller's son heading back to the way from which they came in a rage, a long sword slung over his shoulder. He smiled as he asked, Young master, what's happening? Someone entered the city again. Yang Yixuan huffed. Those people from Hua, wherever, are the most useless. They're all just rushing to their deaths. Huanhua Palace must have sent more aid, i.e. additional victims, but as the boy's face was puffed up like a steamed bun, Shen Qingque couldn't help teasing him a bit. Young man, your martial skills are rather good. Did you have a teacher? Yang Yixuan ignored him. Let me tell you, you should go find a Gogo who tossed you... Let me tell you, you should go find the Gogo who tossed you into the water today, Chen Jingque continued. He is most formidable. Fighting a few rounds with him will be more effective than learning from anyone. When he heard this, Yang Yixuan abandoned Chen Jingque and ran. Having found Liu Qingge a sticky new problem, Chen Jingque was in a joyful mood. He walked a few steps and turned a corner, but when he saw the scene before him, he stopped in his path. The city was devoid of life, and the gates of every home were shut tight. Many of those who had been homeless in the first place had nowhere to go, so they could only gather on the street. Before, when carriages and horses had streamed through the streets, people coming and going, these forsaken had been afraid to show their faces, but now, with everything so empty, they became fearless. They'd set up a big iron cauldron and piled firewood underneath it, and they were boiling a churning pot of water as some plucked the feathers of a chicken stolen from who knows where. Each person was wrapped in tightly bound layers of black cloth, but upon seeing Shen Qinque, who was extremely conspicuous in their midst, they were not the least bit shocked. Instead, they regarded him like they would a corpse. After all, these days they had seen every kind of impressive-looking cultivator sweep into the city, claiming they would save the rabble, and had they been of any use? They died even faster than the local drifters. The cook rapped on the iron pot. "Soup is done, come get your share." Many of the drifters lying nearby, who were picking up their lice rolled to their feet and gathered around, bowls in hand. This plague had disrupted the rhythms of the entire city's day-to-day, so this spontaneous communal meal was liable to actually save some lives. They had to discover the origin of the plague soon. Silently making this resolution to himself, Shen Qinque turned to go, only to come face to face with a person walking toward him. Oh goodness. They held a walking stick, the figure hunched over, the hand holding their bowl, shaking so much it was about to slip. They seemed to be an old lady. Shen Qinque moved to get out of the way, but the old lady must have been weak due to age or fatigue from hunger. She tripped and crashed into Shen Qinque. As Shen Qinque helped her up, the old lady mumbled, "Apologies, apologies, I'm old and confused." She quickly walked past him and away, probably afraid people would take all the soup. I don't trust it. I feel like she is a demon or something, and she just infected Shen Qinque. And the problem is, I don't know if that's just my instincts, or if it's me subconsciously remembering something that I've read already. But that is the thought I'm having. Maybe I'm completely wrong either way. Shen Qinque walked another 2 steps, then balked. Something was off. That old lady had looked like the faintest breeze would knock her over, but when her body crashed into him, hadn't it seemed even heavier than that of an adult man? He whipped his head back around. In that crowd of people clamoring for bowls of soup, the old lady he had just seen was nowhere to be found. There was an opening into an alley to the left. Shen Qinque dashed into it in pursuit. He just managed to catch a glimpse of the hunchbacked silhouette flashing down the end of the alley. Frick! With this speed, they wouldn't lose to a running doing the 100-meter hurdles. Old lady? Yeah, right, I must be blind. Shen Qinque broke into a run and gave chase. Though this old lady was indeed suspicious, could he be blamed for not realizing something was strange right away? Right now, everyone in Jinlang City cut the same suspicious figure. What with all the walking around while hunched over and dressed entirely in black? Mid-chase, he suddenly felt an itch at the back of his hand and raised it up to look. This limb really was plagued with misfortune. It was this arm that had been poked full of holes by Elder Skyhammer Tian Qie, and now it was this hand that had become infected and was breaking out in red patches. Come to think of it, it had also been the hand that had first clicked on the stupid novel. Proud, immortal demon way. If only he could chop it off. Ah. It's kind of hilarious, even though it's also super stressful. With this brief distraction, Shen Qinque slowed his step. Then he sensed someone charging over, sword glare at the ready. With a flick of his fan, he prepared to return fire with a blade of wind and yelled, "Who goes there?" The person sprang from a nearby roof to the ground. The two looked at each other, and Shen Qinque blurted out, Gongyi Xiao? The youth immediately lowered his weapon and responded in more shock than joy. Senior Shen? It's me. Why are you here too? Then Shen Qingqi remembered that Yang Shen had said more of Huanhua Palace's people had entered the city through the underground river. That must have been the party with which Gongyi Xiao had arrived. So, Huanhua Palace sent you to lead a scouting party into the city? He asked. Gongyi Xiao replied, Indeed, this junior was ordered to investigate the city, but the leader is someone else. Shen Qingqi thought this curious. Gongyi Xiao was the favorite disciple of Huanhua Palace's old palace master. Before Luo Binghe appeared, everyone had tacitly agreed that Gongyi Xiao would be the next leader, and even the old palace master's beloved only daughter adored him. Whenever the disciples of his generation did anything, Gongyi Xiao was always in charge. Other than Luo Binghe, who could stomp all over this young man with his protagonist's halo, who else could steal such a position? But at that moment, there was no time to mull it over. Let's chase them together, Shen Qingqi said. Gongyi Xiao gave a resounding agreement, and the two leapt forward, side by side. The hunchbacked figure flashed into three-story buildings. Even from outside, a haze of fragrant powder assailed the nose, and as the structure was covered in a beautiful decoration, it had to be some sort of brothel. But now there was no joyful voices or laughing conversations, no signs or sounds of prosperity, only a gate left wide open, the main hall dreary and oppressive. Holding their breaths and on full alert, the pair stepped over the threshold. The chairs and tables in the main hall were overturned, leaving everything in a scattered mess. Shen Qingqi gave Gongyi Xiao a look. Let's split up and search. You check the private rooms on the left, and I'll take the right. And don't let the woman touch you. You should have told them that as well. He used his fan to push open the nearest door. He could make out the indistinct form of a person lying on the bed, and initially raised his guard, but he lowered it soon after. It was only a skeleton, wearing a colourful adorned jacket, its head covered in pearls and jade, lying in a serene position. This was likely one of the women of the establishment who, knowing the time had come, had dressed and groomed herself, donned her best clothes, and gone to meet her death in sleep. Perhaps it was the nature of women to insist on bringing their most beautiful selves even to the end. Shen Qingqi sighed in sorrow, backed out of the room, and shut the door. That is really depressing, damn. Many rooms in a row each contained the corpses of women in formal dress. It seemed like this brothel had practically been wiped out. As Shen Qingqi was about to push open the sixth room, he heard the sound of movement and human voices from the second floor. As he flew up the stairs with Gongyi Xiao, Shen Qingqi stole to the front, but unexpectedly, before his feet had left the staircase, he heard the gentle voice of a youth. It's no trouble. Though it was only 3 words, as soon as Shen Qingqi heard this voice, it was as if he had been struck by a bolt of lightning. The fan in his hand cracked under the force of his grip. Is that Luo Binghe? Am I hoping for too much? Please let that be Luo Binghe. For an instant, it was like even his breath had ceased. He was paralyzed on the steps, but he could already see into the private room at the end of the long second-floor corridor. A group of disciples dressed in Huanhua Palace's colors had crowded around a person in the center. It was a youth wearing black, shouldering a modest, unadorned longsword, his complexion as clear as jade, his eyes like 2 deep pools of cold starlight, and he was at present nonchalantly moving towards Shen Qingqi. He had grown up quite a bit, and the feel of his presence was far different from before. But even if Shen Qingqi was beaten to death, he would never mistake that face, one that could grace the cover of a romance novel, no matter the angle. At the same time, a familiar voice, which had spent a long time gathering dust, spoke in Shenjinchu's head. In a mechanical tone reminiscent of Google Translate, it began to spout off messages like a barrage of gunfire. Oh, it's looping her! Okay. Sorry, just give me a second. I was not thinking we would see him this soon. Okay, I'm vaguely excited and nervous at the same time because obviously they did not leave off on the best terms. So I shouldn't be getting my hopes up for anything, but with looping her here, at least there's like a vague possibility of Shenjinche surviving the plague. Cause here's my thing, okay, just like a mini theorization. So I kind of left off the novel, or the last thing that I really remember sticking about the novel is Shen Jingchu returning in a new body, basically. Um, and so I don't know like where everything goes after that, but I mean, you know, by the rules of a novel, once the protagonist is interested in you, don't you kind of become invincible as well, sort of? Maybe, somewhat. So that's what I'm like thinking. At some point, that has to happen to Shen Qingqiu, and I'm just wondering if it will happen, when it will happen, if it does happen, and like, will Shen Qingqiu notice? So I don't know if I'm talking nonsense, but we shall see. So, system activation successful. And the art! Look at the art! Look at it! That's stunning! It's, yes. He has indeed grown up. Universal activation key, lobing her. Self-examination results. Central power source is operating normally and in good condition. Hibernation mode suspended. Normal operation mode activated. Download and installation of update complete. Wait a minute. What the hell? You actually updated? Thank you for your continued use of our services. Can I get a refund? Chen Qingqiu stared at that young man, who ought to have been familiar, yet seemed a stranger. His limbs were stiff, and his throat dry. Wasn't Lobingher's grand comeback supposed to be in 5 years after he fell? Wasn't he currently supposed to be inside an endless hell, carving his way through thorns, studying the blade, and farming monsters? Why had his ascension moved up 2 whole years? Why were you so impatient? If you rush your leveling, you won't have any safeguards. Binger. Binger? Excuse me? Since when is he your Binger? Chen Qingxue had the urge to turn around and sprint down the stairs, sprint out of Jinlan City, and sprint out of this frickin' world. But right after he turned around, Gong Yishao blocked his path, and the youth just had to ask, Senior Shen, why are you suddenly turning back? You really can't read the room, understand timing, or catch on to faces before you speak. Can you, young master Gong Yi? A seemingly gentle voice came from behind him. Shizun? Next up, Shen Jingque slowly turned his head. It was only a simple movement, but right now it felt like his head weighed several thousand kilograms. At this moment, in his eyes, that perfect face of loving hers was more frightening than anything in the world. What scared him even more was the expression on that face. It was neither icy cold nor a poisonous smile, hiding daggers within, but a kind and tender look that could warm its recipient down to their bones. Oh no! I love it and I hate it at the same time. Frick, don't act like that, it's terrifying. The more silky soft, loving her smile, the more thoroughly his opponent's soul and body were about to be destroyed. This statement was absolutely not a joke. Shen Jingqi's entire person was stuck at the top of the stairs, unable to ascend or descend, his hair rising all down his back. Luo Binghe strolled over and spoke softly. "It really is Shizun." His voice was velvety and light, but every word that emerged from between his teeth and every tap of his footfalls as he took each step sent Shen Jingqi's heart through the equivalent of a high-altitude bungee jump combined with an ice bucket challenge. Oh my word, why does that feel so modern? I'm aware that ice bucket challenges are old by this point, but it feels almost too modern for this book for some reason. The guillotine blade was already over his neck, nothing left but to face it. Shen Qingque gathered his composure and steeled himself. His right hand clutched the slots. What the hell is that? Slats of his fan, the veins bulging faintly, while his left swept up the hem of his teal robes. With a lift of his foot and one more step, he finally made it onto the second floor. With that single step, he was already about to burst into tears. Back in the year Luo Binghe had participated in the Immortal Alliance conference, their eyes had been level with each other. But now Shen Jingque had to slightly lift his head to look Luo Binghe in the eye. He was already coming up short based on the force of her presence alone. Literally, oh goodness. Fortunately, Shen Jingque had been a poser for years now, so he had plenty of experience. No matter how terrified he was on the inside, no matter how turbulent his emotions, his serene, unperturbed expression was solidly baked onto his face. After a long while, he painfully squeezed out a line from within his throat. "What exactly is going on here?" Luo Binghe gave him a smile, but he seemed to have no intention of answering. Instead, it was the group of Huanhua Palace disciples behind him who crowded forward, clothes rustling. Only now did Shen Jingque realize that these disciples' attitude were completely off. In his early years, Shen Jingque had known in the way of a great and revered scholar. Had been known in the way of a great and revered scholar, and his name had swept all through the land. Even when he met others from the same generation, it was rare for them to not conscientiously welcome him with respect, to say nothing of a junior from another sect. Yet these Huanhua Palace disciples seemed to be full of hostility towards them. Their gazes brimmed with displeasure, and some were already flashing their weapons. Given how Luo Binghe was standing there, perfectly unflappable, this group of perfectly fine youths from a famous righteous sect looked more like a gang of henchmen ready to rush forward and stake their lives for their boss, or, like demonic lackeys, poised to kill and burn. Ooh. Don't you have it wrong, young people? Don't be in such a hurry to be someone's bodyguard, okay? As if the person behind you needs your protection. It's already pretty good that he's not harming anyone, but the person who really needs protection is me. Me! Realizing that the atmosphere was off, Gong Yishao inserted himself between the disciples and Shen Jingque. "Put your swords away," he reprimanded them quietly. "What sort of manners are these?" Okay, I am gonna take my break now because we're at the start of page 34, and then we shall resume at 10 past. Okay, I am back a minute early just in case like in case someone is gonna return right on the dot at 10. I'm just gonna quickly, I don't know, talk nonsense or something. I don't know. But anyway, we are back. I hope the audio is still okay. It should be. But yeah, I feel like we're making good headway. We'll definitely, I think, probably reach about page 50 before the end of tonight. So that'd be good. We have a total of 302 pages. So yeah, I think we'll do it in about a month's time. Probably a little bit more because we're only doing one session a week for this. But we shall see. Okay, I think we can get started again. They relented and showed some restraint. The ones who'd drawn their swords grudgingly sheathed them, but their hostility towards Shen Jingqi didn't decrease. No wonder. Of course, Gong Yishao wasn't the one leading the party this time. A while back, if the most highly regarded disciple had spoken, none of his fellow disciples would have dared to show displeasure. But now, Luo Binghe was here, and his post-darkening brainwashing skills were first-rate, so everything inevitably revolved around him. Even after 10,000 years, no one else could ever again become the default leader. But even though Shen Qingque felt like he was about to suffer a concussion from pure shock, he still couldn't figure this out. When exactly had Luo Binghe infiltrated Huanhua Palace? In the original work's progression, that didn't happen until at least 2 years in the future. Both sides stood stiffly for a while, until a graceful young lady, dressed in a light yellow outer robe, abruptly emerged from the sidelines. "You still have time for this?" she said while shedding tears. "Luo Shishong, that scoundrel harmed Luo Shishong. Can't you focus on finding a way to help him first?" Only now did Shen Qingque notice a humanoid figure collapsed in the far corner. It was that fake old lady. He looked at Luo Binghe again and saw that a portion of his sleeve seemed to have been shaved away by a sword glare, exposing a small section of his wrist. Luo Binghe's skin was very fair, so the couple of red spots on his wrist were especially stark. Okay, but doesn't okay, yay, sorry, I'm glad the audio sounds good. Um wouldn't his like demon blood snuff out any plague or something magical like that? I don't know. Shen Qingque instinctively let slip. "You were infected?" Luo Binghe gave him a glance, then shook his head. "It's but a minor wound. All that matters is that everyone is safe." With that considerate display of selflessness, for a moment, Shen Jingqi could almost believe that the individual before his eyes was still that bleating, grass-loving little lamb who had huddled behind his knees. However, the Huanhua Palace disciples really were good at raining on his parade. "Isn't this just perfect?" one remarked sarcastically. "I suppose Senior Shen's overjoyed that Luo Shishong was infected by the plague, right?" Shen Jingqiu was seriously starting to wonder when exactly he'd offended the entirety of Huanhua Palace. Gong Yishao took in Shen Jingqiu's expression and felt incredibly embarrassed. He turned back to his fellows and scolded them in a low tone. "Be quiet, all of you." As a senior who'd made his name years ago, Shen Jingqiu could never sink so low as to squabble with insignificant youths who'd been brainwashed by the male lead. Expression indifferent, Shen Qingque dropped his arm so the sleeve naturally covered the back of his hand that had broken out into red spots after he'd first bumped into the fake old lady. Pock marks covered half the face of the disciple who'd spoken. Once scalded, he resentfully closed his mouth, his entire expression reeking dissatisfaction. Then, Qingwan Ye spoke. It's all your fault, Luo Shishong. If you hadn't protected us, you wouldn't have. Chen Qingque had already roughly surmised the truth of what was spreading through the city. He could guarantee it on all youths and he couldn't guarantee it on all the youths and frustrations he'd wasted following the 20 million word plus serialization for years. Oh goodness, okay. Let me just. I need a pillow to kind of rest this on. First, to a mixed lineage heavenly demon like Luo Binghe, this thing was the approximate equivalent of a saline water or glucose. Entirely harmless. It might even have health benefits for him. Second, if Luo Binghe had let others drag him down or been injured for their sake, that was definitely a plan of his own design. No need to ponder. Don't you know that that's the fastest way to farm righteous reputation and favor points? Shen Qingque couldn't stand to keep watching the air of heartbroken grief hung over Huang Hua Palace's party. Of course, what he couldn't stand even more was having that silent stare down with Luo Binghe. It was as if both of them were waiting for the other to speak first. Instead, Shen Qingque steeled himself and prepared to do a bit of proper business. Without another sideways glance, he walked towards that fake old lady's corpse and drew Shu Ya. With a few slashes, he shredded the black cloth to pieces, revealing the body inside. As expected, at a glance, this person's appearance was ordinary, and it was impossible to tell if they were male or female. But that wasn't the main point. The main point was this, and it was dreadful. The body's skin was completely scarlet, like the entire thing had been thrown into boiling water and cooked through. Yet rather than having been reduced to a mush, the carcass was whole. Ugh, that's a terrible description, damn. A sower, said Shen Qingque. Sower was a type of profession among demons. To put it mundanely, as Shen Qingque understood it, they were the demon realm's equivalent of farmers, farm owners, and wholesale food distributors. Due to a variety of reasons, including local geography and race, many of the demon realm's creatures had rather peculiar biological needs. This included a portion of demons who tended towards hardcore tastes. To put it concretely, they liked to eat rotten things. The more rancid and putrid, the better. Ugh. Anything crawling with maggots was considered to be an exceptionally exquisite delicacy and abundantly nutritious. Sounds delicious. Ugh. But where could one acquire such a quantity of rotten things? This was the purpose of the sowers. The flesh of every non-demonic organism a sower touched and purposefully seeded would, after a short period of time, begin to fester. In days past, the practice had enabled a type of mass communal meal that had been popular on noble estates in the demon realm. The estate lord would capture some 100 living people and would corral them into a structure like cattle, not kettle, cattle, then send sowers into their midst. Within 7 days, once the victims had suffered sufficiently rotten, the doors could be opened. You could either let the people stumble out and eat them where they fell, or walk inside yourself and devour them on the spot. That is so many levels of disgusting. I feel quite ill. This manner of unique dining custom was disgusting in the extreme, well said. Of course, the ancient heavenly demons from whose lineage Luo Binghe hailed were the most elegant and traditional of demonic bloodlines, equivalent to the demon realm's blue blood nobility. The average demon commoner's B-point score couldn't begin to compare to the heavenly demons. Needless to say, the heavenly demons had not taken part in these faddish tastes. If not for that, loving her could be as handsome and as rule-breaking OP as he wanted, but girls would be unable to overcome yep, the psychologically and physiologically taxing challenge this bizarre world-building detail would present to their worldviews. So Shenjing Chua suspected. Think about it. How suffocating would it feel to kiss him if it were true? Ha ha ha. Oh, don't even speak about that. That is. Ugh. Since sower as a profession was grossly anti-human, it had incited the uncompromising ire of many human realm cultivators at the time. Consequently, they had launched a campaign to eradicate all sowers. Quite a few nameless heroes had even risked infection and ended up perishing together with the sowers. Within 10 years, sowers had gone almost entirely extinct, becoming rare even within the demon realm. It was entirely normal for young disciples and ordinary cultivators to have never heard of them. But whenever he was at his leisure, Shenjing Chua was in the habit of taking an aged text from Qingjing Peak's eclectic collection and reading it as a speculative fiction novel, so he understood the situation well. Unfortunately, this conclusion that he'd come to all by himself, which should have been a helpful contribution, went unappreciated. So, Senior also knows about the demonic abominations that are sowers? Qing Wanyu said politely. Lu Shishong guessed the identity of the culprit a while back. Just now, he explained the relevant information to us in detail. Of course he did. When she finished, she and all the other Huanhua disciples directed an adoring, longing gaze towards Lu Binghe, as if his face were emitting thousands of rays of golden light. Oh goodness. It's here. Could this be the legendary, regardless of what the male lead says, everyone else will feel their own IQ and knowledge get absolutely crushed by his words, protagonist halo of wisdom? I think it might indeed be that. Lu Binghe looked towards Shen Qingque and smiled. Everything I know was taught to me by Shizun. The most terrifying thing was that Shen Qingque got the feeling that Lu Binghe's face really was emitting a faint glow. Shen Qingque very much didn't want to waste any more time in this kind of eerie atmosphere. However, since Huanhua Palace had killed the Sower, naturally the right to handle the corpse was also theirs. If that's the case, may we borrow the corpse for study? Shen Qingque asked. It's possible Mu Shidi may discover something and it may assist us to develop a medicine that will curb the epidemic as early as possible. Real life just kind of filtered into my sentence there. If that's the case, may we borrow the corpse for not me reading it again. Lu Binghe nodded. Everything will be as Shizun says. This disciple will deliver the corpse promptly. The way that Shizun left his mouth every time he said it made all of Shen Qingque's hairs stand on end. At last, he acutely understood how characters in the original work felt when facing that dagger-concealing smile of Lu Binghe's. Shen Qingque pulled himself away and flicked aside his sleeves, then left without a second word. After exiting that abandoned building, Shen Qingque fell into a state of devastated psychological shock. His head swam as he walked, his steps unsteady. Gong Yishao chased after him. When he saw that Shen Qingque's face was pale, his expression distracted, he nervously said, Senior Shen, I must apologize. In truth, I know that Lord Shishong was with Huanhua Palace, but our master ordered us to keep it strict secret and to not let any outsiders know. Violators would be expelled from the sect. I couldn't inform you of the situation. Shen Qingque grabbed him. I have only one question for you. When and how did Luo Binghe end up in your Huanhua palace? Oh, the tension. It was Qin Shimei. Last year, she rescued a grievously injured and unconscious Luo Shishong on the banks of the Luo River. Last year? In only one short year, Luo Binghe had kicked Gong Yishao off his pedestal and as the most trusted disciple. It seemed that not only had Luo Binghe's annexation of Huanhua Palace occurred earlier, but his efficiency had improved. Also, Gong Yishao really was doomed to be cannon fodder, fated only to be kicked off of numerous number one pedestals by the male lead. After you rescued him, why didn't he return to Tangchong Mountain sect? Shen Qingque asked. Gong Yishao took careful stock of Shen Qingque's expression, and he spoke cautiously. Once Luo Shishong was rescued and woke up, he seemed to be unwilling to bring up the past. When he was delivering his farewells, he disclosed that he wouldn't return to Tangchong Mountain sect and that he hoped Huanhua Palace would keep his whereabouts a secret. It seemed he intended to wander the world, but our master thinks very highly of Luo Shishong, so he vigorously urged him to stay. They don't call each other master and disciple, but with the way our master treats him, he's already no different from a succeeding heir. So that's how it was. Oh goodness, why am I stressing so much? No wonder the Huanhua Palace disciples had shown such a hostile attitude towards Shen Qingque just a moment ago. This act of Luo Binghe's was his standard trampled white lotus who silently endures. People had no doubt begun to think, if everything is fine, why would Luo Binghe be unwilling to return? Maybe it's because Tangchong Mountain sect, and Shen Qingque in particular, have wronged him. That false news of his death at the Immortal Alliance conference must be covering up some terrible secrets. I mean, it's a fair assumption, unfortunately. Okay, let me just quickly grab a little bit of tea. I can't help but wonder where this volume will end. Probably at the rebirth of Shen Qingque, but I don't know. Luo Binghe's brainwashing skills weren't just talk. Having seen how those disciples blindly and fastidiously followed him, Shen Qingque knew exactly where Luo Binghe stood with Huanhua Palace. A disciple from Sect A took a trip to Sect B. Subsequently, the entire hierarchy of Sect B, from top to bottom, cried and begged for him to stay, and even hid and concealed him so other sects wouldn't find out. How unscientific and unreasonable. But with the male lead's halo shining down upon the situation, it was absolutely logical. Shen Qingque was silent. Gong Yishao thought him sad and disappointed. His beloved disciple hadn't died, but had instead preferred to roam around the world instead of returning to see him. Of course, this was painfully tragic. So, Gong Yishao offered consolation. Senior Shen shouldn't pay it any mind. Perhaps Luo Shishong is struggling with a temporary internal conflict that he is yet to resolve. Before now, he never left Huanhua Palace's sphere of influence. Yet when he heard that Tangchong Mountain sect's Senior Shen was participating in rescue efforts here, he took the initiative and asked to come. Oh hell. That should make Shen Qingque worry. Perhaps there's been some turn for the better, although Mai Shidi and Shimei on this matter, I believe they've misunderstood Senior. I hope you won't hold it against them. Shen Qingque's heart was as choked as the dammed up river. Sure enough, the positive reputation he'd painstakingly farmed over many years was nothing in the face of Luo Binghe's ability to smear him without second thought. And what a thorough smearing. But on second thought, this couldn't actually be considered smearing. After all, Shen Qingque hadn't been wrongly accused in this case. He had indeed kicked Luo Binghe down into the endless abyss. He did indeed. In the end, he couldn't find any reason to justify or exonerate himself. And you? Shen Qingque asked. Why don't you misunderstand? Gong Yishao was stunned for a short while. Then he said, though I don't know what exactly happened in Judi Gorge, I wholeheartedly believe that Senior isn't the sort of person who would harm his own disciple. As he said this, Gong Yishao was thinking back on their meeting in Bailu Forest. Specifically, he was remembering the things Shen Qingque had accidentally let slip, and the way he affectionately gazed upon that monster. Meanwhile, Shen Qingque was thinking, it makes sense, since we're both cannon fodder fated to fall to the male lead's indestructible body. We're able to understand and sympathize with each other's situations more than anyone else. Therefore, both parties were moved. It's kind of hilarious. While they were busy being pleased within their own minds, the group from Huanhua Palace caught up with them. Shen Qingque accidentally glanced back and saw that Luo Binghe was looking over in his direction. In the brief, incensed time since his reunion with Luo Binghe, it seemed that Shen Qingque's heart had become quite a bit more delicate. It often felt like a small boat caught in a raging sea amidst a storm. For example, at present, though Luo Binghe wasn't standing anywhere close to him and had maintained an appropriate smile, that pair of cold, pitch-black eyes pierced him with incredible force, making Shen Qingque's heart tremble in fright. Are we sure it's just fright though? I'm just asking for a friend. Bingo. What's wrong now? Even the sight of cannon fodder talking and huddling together for warmth offends you? I mean, it could be jealousy, I'm just saying. Upon arriving at the entrance of Jinji Weapons Shop, Shen Qingque heard someone inside who was arguing loud enough to shake the roof. This was all thanks to Luo Qingge. Luo Qingge was responsible for the hard labor, and after they'd separated, he'd gone to capture experimental subjects for Mu Qingfan. With the people in the city so on edge, no one was willing to cooperate. However, at this point, they didn't have the luxury to be concerned with consent, so they had resorted to martial power to resolve the problem. I don't know if that's a good idea, but okay. On top of that, Lord Qingge had never been the sort of patient person who preferred reason over force. His approach was highly consistent with Bai Jiang Peak's customs. He simply went out and grabbed whoever he saw. In one pass, he had collected more than 10 burly macho men, then tied them up by the forge, which had by now become Mu Qingfang's research lab and experimental station. The group of big, strong men were shouting, cursing, crying, and wailing so terribly that no woman could have overcome their performance. Why is that such a funny image? Oh my goodness. Once Shen Qingque arrived in the cellar, he explained the unexpected events he had just experienced to his companions. However, for the time being, he didn't bring up that he himself had been infected. Master Wu Chen once again chanted Amitabha? No, I will have to go look up how to pronounce that. Thanks to our fellow cultivators from Tangchong Mountain, we finally made progress on this matter. I'm afraid it's not that straightforward, said Shen Qingque. The infected cannot infect each other, and according to Qingjing Peak's ancient texts, the large recorded number of people a single Sir has infected in one go is only around 300. If a population as large as an entire city had been infected, there absolutely has to be more than one culprit. Oh, great! That's wonderful news. I didn't realize that. Liu Qingge placed his hand on his sword hilt and stood. Shen Jingqiu knew he was the type to act first and think later, so to up and leave without another word. He indubitably wanted to set out and find other souls this instant. Slow down, Shen Jingqiu said hurriedly. I still have something else to say. Go ahead, Shishong, said Mu Qingfang. Shen Jingqiu didn't know how to start, and he hesitated for a moment before saying, Lu Binghe's back. There was little reaction. In the first place, of the three masters, Wu Chen was from the Zhaohua monastery and didn't know this Lu Binghe. Meanwhile, Mu Qingfang rarely cared about things other than medicine. Thus, it was only Liu Qingge who frowned. That disciple of yours? He asked, stunned. Didn't he die at the hands of demons during the Immortal Alliance conference? Shen Jingqiu found it was getting harder to explain. He didn't die. He came back alive. It's a long story. He stepped forward. Let's patrol the city first. I'll explain this in detail when we get back. All right, said Mu Qingfang. The earlier we take care of the remaining souls, the fewer horrors the people will suffer. I should also go check on those patients. As soon as he spoke, Shen Qingqiu thought of that brightly shining set of silver surgical tools Mu Qingfang always carried with him, which included all kinds of knives and needles. When spread out, they seemed to belong to the scene of a forensic autopsy. There were also hundreds upon hundreds of bottles and jars in his infinite storage, with all sorts of labels. The words and descriptions on these labels were just like the flavor and effects of the contents within. Stuff that made people go green upon hearing, let alone smelling, that made their courage flee with a glance. In a moment, that group of macho men by the forging station upstairs likely really would be blowing their lids, and the Ruth with it. Oh my goodness, I just love the way she writes. Shen Jingqiu let out a dry laugh. He was about to follow Luo Qingge out of the cellar when from out of nowhere his heartbeat suddenly seemed 100 times louder. His movements also became slower, becoming sluggish. Luo Qingge sensed that something was off and immediately asked, What's wrong? Shen Jingqiu didn't answer and only tried to summon a spiritual blast with his right hand. A feeble spiritual flow sputtered through it, forming not a single spark. How? Of course I have a flare-up at such an important time. Are you kidding me? Without a cure, Mu Qingfang said quietly. Liu Qingge pressed his fingers to Shen Jingqiu's pulse, waiting there for a moment before resolutely pushing him back down into a chair. Sit here and wait. Wait for what? For Lu Binghe to show up at their door? Shen Jingqiu stood to his feet. I'm going with you. Lu Qingge never gave others face when speaking. Don't be a hindrance. Master, you're the Baizhang Peak Lord capable of single-handedly holding off thousands of enemies. How would letting me fly with you be a hindrance? I can't even. Shen Qishong, have you taken your medicine today? Was it on time? Mu Qingfang asked. Probably not, if I know him at all. Shen Qingqiu truly wanted to scream at the heavens. I haven't given up on therapy. I clearly took my medicine on time this month, and I had great master Lure help circulate my meridians. What was that? My meridians on time too. Exactly why would it randomly flare up? It's basically lightning on a clear day. I'm utterly baffled. I mean, you did get infected by the sower. That might be something to think about. At that moment, the system just had to, of all things, send a sudden notification. Protagonist satisfaction points plus 100. Get lost. What are you saying with this? Whenever Shen Qingque meets misfortune, the male lead is extra satisfied? Shen Qishong, you must not force yourself, Mu Qingfang added. Liu Shishong is also doing this for your own good. Exerting yourself and rushing around during a flare-up is enormously dangerous. You stay here and rest. I'll go prepare medicine. Wait for Liu Shishong to return, and then he'll help you clear your meridians. Shen Qingque stood 3 times, but Liu Qingge pushed him back down every single one, and Mu Qingfang's tone was that of a man lecturing an unruly child. In the end, Shen Qingque could only helplessly say, "Very well. Liu Shiji, listen to me. Asura's entire body is covered with scarlet skin, and they are highly infectious. If you meet something suspicious that looks similar, don't be rash and get close. Attack from afar. Once you return, you must come to my room without delay. I have something very important to discuss with you." The last sentence was the most critical. Shen Qingque deliberately enunciated the words with added emphasis. Comradeship is priceless and fraternal love supreme. 1,000 days are spent training troops for the sake of one moment. Master Lo, you absolutely must shield me. I'm assuming he's scared that he's gonna need help handling Lo Binghe or something. After the Liu Mu pair left the cellar, Wu Chen descended into an intense thought. "Immortal Master Shen, don't you think it strange?" he asked. "The demon realm was quiet for so long, yet in recent years there seems to be signs of a resurgence. At the last Immortal Alliance conference, numerous rare demonic creatures reappeared in the human realm. And this incident in Jinlan City is even more troubling. So is appearing now after they were eradicated 100 years ago. This one worries that this most likely isn't a good omen." Fair. Shen Qingque profoundly agreed. "Master, your apprehensions are exactly why I can't be at ease, and this iteration of servers are markedly stronger than their predecessors. None of the servers I read about from 100 years back were able to prevent the infected from traveling a certain distance from them, lest they undergo accelerated decay. Moreover, Lo Binghe should have remained in the endless abyss for 2 more years, yet he's broken out early. How could this be a good omen?" Fair as well, but also I would worry at this point how it would affect the overall story. After being infected, Master Wu Chen's martial aspects had been heavily damaged, and the drain on his energy was enormous. Not long into their discussion, he became tired. Shen Qingque helped him lie down, then did his best to quietly leave the cellar. They had hidden Wu Chen within the cellar so he wouldn't be exposed to light or the elements. Shen Qingque's actual room was on the 2nd floor of the weapon shop's inner courtyard. Lo Qingge had yet to return, and at this time it would have been impossible for Shen Qingque to sleep, even if he wanted to. He sat at a table and lost himself in his thoughts. One moment he'd think of the little lamb Lo Binghe, who'd always followed him around while calling Shizun. In the next, he'd think of that black lotus Lo Binghe he'd only just met, who had left him so thoroughly drenched and uneasy that he wanted to rip out all his hair. After an unknown length of time, someone knocked on the door twice, neither light nor heavy. Shen Qingque hastily stood from the table. "Yoshidi, I've been waiting for you all night. Come in quickly." That's gonna be Lo Binghe, isn't it? The room's set of double doors flew open. Lo Binghe stood in the entrance. Behind him was unbound darkness. His hands were tucked behind his back. His lips curved slightly upwards, but his eyes seemed like ice pools 1,000 meters deep. Yet those eyes smiled as he said, "Shizun, hello." Oh hell, he's here. All at once, it was as if Shen Qingqi's brain had started boiling, catching fire with a whoosh. Hell, the ring was playing out live right before his eyes. He grabbed his fan and with nimble fingers leapt out the window. Lobing had finally done away with that goosebump-raising mask he'd worn during the day and exposed his true nature, and had come to make his teacher pay. Changing Chu's flight was an entirely unconscious impulse. The poser habits he developed over so many years allowed him to persevere, so that even while fleeing his movements were easy and graceful. He landed solidly on the ground, and with the top of his foot darted away like a flying bird. I thought you were suffering with like a flare-up of a lack of spiritual power, and yet you're flying. Lobingher's clear, bright voice pierced far through the air, reaching his ears while carrying a hint of cold, drifting laughter. During the day, Shizun was so intimate and gentle with Gong Yishao. Oh my word! He's not even being subtle about his jealousy. And this evening, you lit a lantern, waiting for Liu Shishu until late into the night. What sincere affection! Why then are you so distant when it comes to this disciple? How? It feels like he's cutting the distance in half with every sentence. The speed is unscientific. Shen Qingqi drew a deep breath, thinking that whatever happened, he ought to find himself a backup first. He shouted from the pit of his stomach, Liu Qingge! Loping Her's voice drew even closer. It was no longer as tender this time around, and instead it came with a wintry laugh. Liu Shishu is embroiled in a fight, so I'm afraid he doesn't have the leisure to come. Shizun, if you have orders, why not give them to me? I wouldn't dare. Shen Qingqi understood that Luo Binghe must have delayed Liu Qingge by some means. Aid from that quarter couldn't be counted on. He swiftly poured his entire body's spiritual energy downward, hoping to boost his speed. But of course, he just had to forget that he was in the middle of a without a cure flare-up. By the time he remembered, it was already too late. In an instant, it was like all the blood in Shen Qingqi's body had solidified, and his entire form felt suddenly heavy. In the next moment, a hand flashed forward to clutch his throat, and his back crashed hard into cold, solid rock wall. The pain resonated from his flesh into his spine, his head buzzing. Luo Binghe was already within arm's reach. He had slammed Shen Qingqi into the wall with one hand. The back of Shen Qingqi's skull rang with the crash, and he swooned. It took a good while before he could refocus his gaze. The way the text just says, he swooned. I don't know why that's so funny to me. Under the streaming moonlight, Luo Binghe looked even more peerlessly beautiful, as if his silhouette had been carved from ice and jade. He pressed very close, and he spoke with slow deliberation. After so many years of separation, we meet again amidst gold wind and jade dew. Yet Shizun incessantly calls someone else's name. That truly saddens this disciple a little. He says he's sad and broken-hearted, but there is a smile on his lips and bloodlust in his eyes. Any way you look at it, he's lying through his teeth. Shen Qingqi felt as if his neck was caught in an iron shackle. His throat bobbed with difficulty, and it was hard to breathe, let alone speak. He could still manage to form a sword seal with his fingers, but his spiritual energy circulation was sluggish, so it was pointless anyway. No matter how perfect a seal he formed, he couldn't move Shuya, and Luo Binghe was pressing harder and harder, his hand gradually tightening. Suddenly, there was a flash before Shen Qingqi's eyes, and a giant dialogue box popped up. This dialog box was entirely different from the one before. Before, they'd uniformly looked like Windows XP error windows. The little details, I just love it. But now it was subdued, lavish, and sophisticated. Wait, the main point was the content. Accept a system tip to resolve the small complication our valued customer is facing. I was about to say it and then changing to his mind said it for me. You call this a small complication? Changing Chu mentally shouted himself hoarse. Alright. Is there still an easy mode? Easy mode, please. Access privileges activated. Use key item to maintain a state of living. Changing Chu's vision was about to go dark from suffocation. There is a key item. How many B points to buy it? Tell me. Item is already in your inventory. Use item Fake Jade Guan Yin to consume 100 of Luo Binghe's anger points. Oh hell. The only thing Luo Binghe's adoptive mother left him, the fake Jade Guan Yin. Right after arriving in this world, he'd acquired the life-saving item, a high-tier piece of equipment. How did he keep forgetting? He still had this get-out-of-jail-free card tucked away in his bosom. System, you finally gave a useful reminder. Changing Chu mentally shouted, I will. His throat was about to be squeezed in two. Please note, this item is single-use and can consume a maximum of 5,000 of Luo Binghe's anger points. At the final moment, Changing Chu yanked on the reins. Stop! This was Luo Binghe at only 100 angry points? Are you messing with me? If he's already this tall, dark, and deadly at 100 anger points, I don't even dare imagine what vision he'd be at 5,000. This is so frustrating. Like, it's so good, but it's so frustrating. Like, it's good because MXT doesn't pull punches with making Shenjing Chu's life hell, but also I just feel bad for Shenjing Chu at the same time. But the point was that if Shenjing Chu was going to use an item that could potentially negate 5,000 points on a situation that was worth only 100, and thereby lose the chance to use it ever again, even if it was a matter of life and death, he needed some time to agonize and struggle. Then again, if things went on like this, it was either death from suffocation or from a pulped throat. Oh great, we love that. Just when Shenjing Chu made up his mind, preparing to grit his teeth and use his life-saving item, the hand around his neck suddenly loosened. There was no way he could get away even if he tried to run, so he could only continue his poser act, pretending to be chill about it. Shenjing Chu propped himself up on the wall, barely managing to stand upright and not sink to his knees on the spot. Seconds ago, Luo Binghe had almost choked him to death, and now he was coming over all smiles to help him up, just like in the past, when he had helped Shenjing Chu alight from carriages and brought him snacks. Shenjing Chu actually forgot to struggle. All he could feel was that his schizophrenic behavior was making his hair stand on end. Luo Binghe sighed. Why did Shizun run so fast? This disciple almost couldn't catch up. Nonsense. As if Luo Binghe hadn't just spent ages chasing him down in a game of cat and mouse, as if it were nothing. He wasn't even short of breath. Shenjing Chu panted, then gingerly opened his mouth. His voice was a bit hoarse. You have quite some nerve, returning in such a grandiose fashion. Aren't you afraid someone will discover your true identity? Luo Binghe's eyes flashed. Is Shizun concerned or worried? Shenjing Chu thought this was an interesting reply. In these circumstances, was there any difference between concerned and worried? He couldn't resist asking, unless you think I won't tell anyone? Luo Binghe looked at him, then said pityingly, Shizun, that would require someone believing you. Oh! Luo Binghe burning. Shen Qingque here. Shen Qingque's heart thumped. So this meant that just like in the original work, Lu Binghe was planning to first utterly destroy Shen Qingque's reputation, then, painstakingly, step by step, force him down the road to ruin, methodically toying with him until he died. The original Shen Qingque had two major scummy qualities: attempting to get a taste of countless young ladies and married women alike, murdering tons of his comrades as well as other people. But now, when Shen Qingque considered himself, after he'd taken this shell, he conclusively hadn't inherited these interests and ambitions from the original. Could Lu Binghe still destroy his prestigious reputation and place in society? Friendly reminder, of course. Shut up, okay? Shen Qingque muttered in his head. You don't need to remind me of reality, thanks. You're welcome. No B points will be deducted for this explanation. Oh, how kind of you, system. You really are too generous. Shen Qingque directly X'd out of the dialogue box that had popped up. He rubbed his throat and stood for a while, then realized that Lu Binghe was actually still staring at him, seemingly with no intention of attacking again. Still looking? He can't possibly be trying to make up for lost time after our years of separation, can he? Protagonist satisfaction points, plus 50. What the hell is going on in Lu Binghe's mind? I can't help but wonder. Haven't you been upgraded? Shen Qingque snapped at the system. Why are you omitting the reason for the point increase? Don't you dare accuse me of farming points later. I didn't even do anything. Where are these points coming from? Also, could you stop appearing for like a second? After a while, Shen Qingque asked out loud, what are you planning to do with your return? Lu Binghe replied, I am merely reminiscing about how Shizun has treated me well, and I wanted to return to see you. Shen Qingque automatically comprehended this as a declaration that Lu Binghe had come back to settle all debts. Oh goodness. In this round of question and answer with Lu Binghe, they had actually managed to be something like congenial, so Shen Qingque tentatively grew braver. Without changing his expression, he moved his hand to his sword hilt. Just to kill me? Then what about the plague in Jinlan City? Has every resident of the city treated you well? Who could have expected that as soon as those words came out of his mouth, they would touch some sore spot inside of Lu Binghe? It was like a cold star had fallen within his eyes, and the faint hint of a smile on his face disappeared without a trace. Shizun harbors a truly relentless hatred towards the demon race, Lu Binghe said mockingly. There was a hint of forcibly suppressed anger in his voice. No, I don't actually. He didn't say that, he thought that. Lu Binghe clenched his teeth. No, I should say a relentless hatred towards me. See, you do understand. Wait, what? Shen Qingque was speechless. He never said that. Lu Binghe took a sudden step towards him. Shen Qingque's expression quickly became cautious, and he retreated a step. But behind his back was a wall, and so there was nowhere to go. Their gazes collided in midair. Then Lu Binghe seemed to realize that he was too worked up, and he closed his eyes, only to open them again after a few moments had passed. Does Shizun honestly think that I would kill, burn, massacre cities, and inevitably topple countries just because of that half of my lineage? It's kind of what you did do, though, unfortunately, but you don't know that. Shen Qingque could only keep his silence. If only he had a physical copy of Proud Immortal Demon Way in his hand, he would have slapped it onto Lu Binghe's face. If you have a smoking gun, then use it. The latter part of 20 million word epic was chock full of ammunition he wanted. With all the things Lu Binghe had done, the phrase kill, burn, massacre cities, and topple countries, and not a dog or a fowl was spared, were barely even exaggerations for dramatic effect. When Chen Qingque looked down without a single word, Lu Binghe took it as tacit agreement. He sneered. Then why did you tell me not to put too much weight on race, and that no one is intolerable to the heavens? Why say such pompous things? His face abruptly grew dark, malice overflowing from between his brows, and he lashed out. Utter hypocrisy, he snarled. Chen Qingque had been prepared for this. At this moment, he rapidly retreated, only just managing to dodge. When he turned his head, he saw that the wall he'd been leaning against had been pulverized. Though he'd long known that after he crawled back out of a place as brutal as the endless abyss, Lu Binghe's temperament would change, he'd never thought it would actually be such an extreme 180. Moody didn't even begin to describe him. Having known this would come about in the novel ahead of time was one thing, but seeing a once familiar person change like this was another entirely. It hit Chen Qingque especially hard because this outcome was basically his single-handed creation. And I have to stop it there for tonight, unfortunately, because we're right at the start of page 56. But I have to say I'm quite happy with the progress. Obviously, we didn't do a full 55 pages because I think it started on page 7. I'm not sure. Um, but yeah, I still think we did a good amount. I'll check to see how long it'll take us to get through this one because this is a little bit more than the previous volume's pages. But I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if all goes to plan, which I really hope it does, there shouldn't be interference this weekend. I'll be continuing with this on Sunday, and then on Saturday will be the next read along for Mordu. So Saturdays will be dedicated to Mordu and Sundays to Scum Villian for now, until further notice basically. So yeah, anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one. 再见。